Thank you so much. A recent Vistage survey of small and mid-sized business CEOs revealed that there's a gap between the importance that these CEOs place on culture and satisfaction with their culture today. In fact, just 11% strongly agreed they were satisfied with their culture. So today's webinar will provide you with perspectives that will help you develop and nurture a culture that can be your legacy as a CEO. Joe Galvin, Chief Research Officer for Vistage, will lead a discussion with two esteemed speakers from the Vistage community who are featured in our Vistage research report, Creating a Conscious Culture, that we published last fall. With us today is Dr. Gustavo Grodnitsky, author of Culture Trumps Everything, and Ann Rhodes, president of People Inc. and co-author of Built on Values. So Joe, I'll turn it over to you to get started with today's session.
Culture occurs naturally whenever you get a group of humans together in a function, whether that's a sports team, a church group, or some community active group. Humans naturally form a culture, and that culture defines what's acceptable and unacceptable in that group. Creating culture has long been a challenge for CEOs. And our research found in doing the work and preparing the report, what we learned is that there is no single right answer to culture. There is no single winning culture. The only right answer is that as a CEO, you have to create the culture you want. An intentional culture, or what we described it as a conscious culture. I think of culture like art. Art ranges from the classical art to the impressionist to today's modern art and everything in between. And everyone likes different forms of art, and no form is better or worse than another. It's merely what you like and what you value. And that's where culture comes in for the CEO. What's important to you about a culture? We've also learned that culture has become even more critical today, and I'll go into some of the data as to why. But as what we describe as the talent wars, we're at full employment. People have access and options, employees do, that they never had before. Retaining talent, we asked this question, if retaining talent is a challenge for you, what are you doing? And 68% of our CEOs identified, and this was the top answer, improving company culture was their #1 strategy for retaining employees. And in a market where, again, employees have options, hiring people is important, but retaining the employees you have is even more important than ever before. What's unique about culture is it's the only thing that is unique to your business. I can copy your product, I can take your customers, I can steal your employees, I can copy your message, but I cannot replicate your culture. It is the one unique and distinct aspect of your business that is uniquely yours. And that's the message here. There's lots of cultures out there. Tom Stewart, Executive Director of the National Center for the Middle Market at The Ohio State University, referenced in our report, they published a study that identified the 7 culture types and the analysis between them in their high performance culture report. The National Center for the Middle Market focuses on middle market companies. The key thing here, the key takeaway is only you can decide what your culture will be. As a CEO, the right answer is you need to create a conscious culture. You need to be intentional about the culture you want, or you'll get the culture you deserve. With that, let me set a background. Let me set up today's discussion with a couple background charts and some data, and then we'll get into the content we have for you today. Our confidence index, which is a survey we do 4 times a year with all of our CEOs, just recently rose in our most recent confidence index. That's the first time it's come up in the last 7 quarters, going back to Q4 of 2017 was the peak. And what's powerful about this is it suggests, as we've learned over time, that our confidence index is ahead of the economy by about 6 months. Now, the economy hasn't been terrible, but it's been slowing. And what we're seeing is the economy is beginning to turn. And why that's powerful, because what is behind this is, one, there's varying degrees of confidence of where the economy has been and where it's going. We still see a strong number of CEOs in terms of percentage. 67% anticipate growth, 57% anticipate greater profits, and all of these factors have bounced off their Q3 lows. But what really jumps out here is 63% of CEOs plan to expand their workforce in the year ahead. What has carried us through this slowdown, and in my opinion has prevented a recession, is the fact that everyone has jobs. Two-thirds of our economy is driven by consumer spending. And if you've got a job, you're going to spend. And if you believe that the opportunities and prospects for future employment are good, you're going to continue to spend. And that's why we think that talent wars has been what's driven the importance of culture. Why? Because people have options in terms of what they make, but they also have options about where they want to work and what they want to be a part of. One of the aspects we know about the new emerging workforces is that this is even more important. Old boomers look for a job, but now the millennials and X's, they want to be part of something more than just a job. From the Q3 confidence index that we did going back into September, we found that 64% rated culture is very important priority for their talent management strategy. It's important for talent, and a lot of times culture execution falls on talent management, but it becomes critical part of it because you think about talent management. What are some of the manifestations that you see of culture? Well, one is new hire onboarding. When is an employee more open to learning about a culture? New hire onboarding. So a question to ask is how active are you in new hire onboarding? Do your new employees learn the culture by walking the halls and talking to people? Or are you very conscious about how you inject that culture? One of the CEOs that I spoke to in doing this research said they schedule their new hire onboarding based on when that person is available, when the CEO is available, because he spends the first 3 hours of onboarding talking about culture. What are your reward and recognition programs? What do you reward? What do you recognize? Performance is always part of it, but it's also part of your culture in terms of how you reward and what you reward. Employee development has become a key aspect of employee retention and employee engagement, but it also speaks to what you're doing to invest in your employees and to grow them. We see that salaries, we see increasing in salaries as people have to compete for compensation, but we also see people competing on benefits, things like really good healthcare or flexible hours or work from home or unlimited vacation, things like that. And then of course your performance management strategy will also dictate a lot about reinforcing the aspects of your culture that are most important to you. And with that kind of setting this up, let's now get into some of the content that we have for you today to review. We're going to start by going through the case for culture. I think we all agree instinctively and intuitively that culture is important and critical, but we want to build a case and shine a little bit of light on that for you. We want to talk about the components of culture. As I said, there's a lot of different ways to think and look about culture. We've developed a thought framework that is just our way of representing how the different elements and aspects all blur together to create this powerful energy called culture. And then we'll cite some examples of some evidence of culture. And along the way, as Ann mentioned, we're going to bring in the expert perspectives of Gustavo and Ann. Gustavo Gordinski has presented on culture 357 times, with another 15, I think, scheduled over the next couple of months for a 4.8 rating. His book, Culture Trumps Everything, is simply a must read. It's where I started in doing the research and understanding it. And oh, by the way, he was Speaker of the Year back in 2013. Ann's going to join us as well. Ann Rhodes has 25 years in business at companies like Southwest, DoubleTree, JetBlue, always focused on creating cultures and blending cultures and acquisitions, building a strong service-oriented culture. And as Ann mentioned, and Petrick mentioned earlier, she's also the co-author of a book, Built on Values. So we look forward to their contributions and the comments they have to share. And our goal here is to create a piece of content here with this webinar that adds color to and brings depth to the report that we created. I invite you to download and read the report, but it's complementary. This event is complementary to that because we want to try to build a little bit around this and add some color to the conversation. So let's talk about the case for culture. We published a document mid-year, and we just updated it for 2020 called Decision Factors. And one of those key decision factors is related to leadership was the importance of culture. And I believe that culture sets the guide rails for how people interact with each other, how they treat each other, how they resolve conflict within the organization. We talk about CEO sentiment. We asked this question in our Q3 survey. Over 1,500 CEOs responded. 63% strongly agreed that performance and success was critical to their company's future. Another 40% identified it as an organizational priority, the top organizational priority. But just 11% were satisfied with the strength of culture. Just 11% thought their strength of their culture was right. And that's why we see so much energy around culture right now, right? We're just about to publish in the next week or so our CEO projections document for 2020. This is a document we publish every year that looks at the key decisions, top investments, and major priorities of our CEO community as they look ahead into 2020. Culture was identified as the top leadership priority for 2020. Again, the recognition in our community of the importance of culture, in terms of how they can compete for talent and how they can retain talent. So it's clear in this environment of full employment, this environment where people have options. You think back to the Great Recession, when people lost their jobs, they were out of work for 12 or 18 months. Today, should someone lose their job, they've got 5 offers waiting for them before the day is done. And that's why culture has become so important as an element that you have to capture. When I think about culture and the case for culture, I think about culture as your organizational gravity. You can't see gravity, but you feel it every day. It's there. Whether you recognize it or not, it affects everything that goes on. And culture is like your company's gravitational force. It's that unseen magnetic force that keeps your good employees attached to you. While during the 60 minutes you're with us on this webinar, there's a good bet someone in your office will be connected or contacted by a recruiter or someone else trying to lure them away. What's going to keep them from answering that phone call or returning that message? It's the strength of your culture and their desire to be part of what your business has created. It also has this reverse effect that repels bad employees. Hiring for cultural fit. A lot of times as businesses change, people are unable or unwilling to change with that culture. I remember speaking to one of our members who commented that he had to fire 2 20-year employees because they had acquired a couple businesses and the culture had shifted and moved, and they didn't want to adjust. All they could talk about is how we used to do it. That's not how we used to do it. It's different. And he had to fire them. 2 20-year employees, and he did it for the strength of the culture. Why? Because everyone is watching what everyone is doing. And if they see they can get away with it, they can expect that. I mean, there's a phrase I like to say that you should expect what you see, meaning that whatever you walk by in the office, that's what you should expect. Expect what you accept. So a culture will repel those bad employees, and it'll repel people and eject people in the hiring process. And oh, by the way, in this new environment where the employees have the power, they're evaluating your culture as part of their job evaluation. Is this a place I want to be a part of? Do these people stand for the things that I stand for and that I believe in? And then finally, and I think most importantly is the fact that your culture is that gravitational force, that magnetic pull that will attract new employees. In small and mid-sized businesses, I'm willing to bet that 85% of your employees live within a 30, 40-minute drive of where your office is and where your business is. You have a brand in the marketplace. Your culture resonates. People talk. People know one thing or another. If you all of a sudden start laying people off, well, that's going to filter out into the community, and people are going to be aware of that. If you've got your culture, is what will attract new employees because they want to be part of something. And that's why culture is like a gravity, like your gravity. It's what's going to keep employees. It's going to repel bad employees, and it's going to attract new employees. And that attraction is really the brand of your business in the marketplace. You need to think about, as brand is to customers, culture is to employees. And when you think about going out and hiring or driving referrals, it's all based on not just what the job is, that's part of it, not what you pay them, that's part of it, but it's also what do they want to be a part of. And that's why we think culture is so important. The data supports this, the anecdotal evidence supports this, and our concept here of gravity suggests that culture has become even more important than ever before. And that's why we need to bring in some real expertise in here to help us understand more about why culture is so important and why culture trumps everything. Welcome, Gustavo. Looking forward to hearing your comments and ideas.
Thanks so much, Joe. Great to be here with you.
Thanks. So, Gustavo, let's jump in. In our report and here on this webinar, we're talking about creating a conscious culture, creating an intentional culture. What does that mean to you? And how can CEOs understand this concept with a little more clarity?
Great. It's a great question, Joe. So thank you for that. So first of all, I think it's important that we define culture, whether we're talking about organizational culture or we're talking culture in our society. Culture is made up of our beliefs, behavioral rules, traditions, and rituals. Those are the components of culture. So beliefs are the way we see the world, what we believe to be important. Values are part of the beliefs of our culture. Behavioral rules are the rules that govern our behavior. Traditions and rituals are simply things we do repeatedly. So when it comes to building an intentional culture, one of the things I don't get to speak about a lot in Vistage presentations, but talk a lot about with individual CEOs is there is no perfect company, there is no perfect culture, there is no perfect human. Because of that, as CEO, building the culture, building an intentional culture means understanding that at some point, you as a CEO who is responsible for leading the culture will have to look at behaviors that are uncomfortable to you. You will have to sacrifice your own comfort to build a culture that sustains the longevity of the company. So an example, I recently worked with a CEO and one of the things I always talk about culture is connectedness, building relationships between people in the organization, people taking a genuine interest in each other. So I was working with a CEO who would walk from the front door to his office and across 100,000, this was a manufacturing plant, across 100,000 square foot plant without saying hello to anybody. And that created a lot of tension and anxiety with everyone that he passed that he wouldn't say anything to. Oh my God, did he figure out I did something wrong? Oh my God, did he find out about that mistake that I made? It just simply created a lot of anxiety. So in our discussion about the importance of relationships and connection in a culture, my communication to the CEO is basically this. Look, I understand in this culture, in your organization, you have a choice. You can build a culture that is a reflection of your personality, or you can build a culture that ensures longevity of the company. Pick one. Because they're usually mutually exclusive. And I'm always pushing for longevity of the company. So for him, he was an introvert. He would say, I'm just introverted. You're asking me to behave like an extrovert. And I would say to him, look, I understand it's your preference, your tendency, your comfort zone to behave like an introvert. For you to ensure the longevity of the company, these will be behaviors that may feel uncomfortable for you.
Wow, Gustavo, that's a very interesting insight. You know, we've touched on this concept of the war for talent and how everybody's competing to attract and retain talent. Now, what can companies do differently to leverage their culture in the hiring process?
Yeah, so I think, Joe, you touched on it a little bit. See, for me, you said as a culture is to employees, as brand is to customers. For me, brand is culture facing outward. So how your employees talk about your culture, how others talk about your culture, that's your brand. So culture is still a huge component of brand for me. The biggest issue around hiring for me is, and I think it's important for people to understand, for me, culture fit is BS. Culture fit assumes that your culture, let's say, because this is what I get all the time in consulting. Well, our culture is like a square hole, so we need people that are a square peg. Because a round peg won't fit in a square hole. And the assumption there is that both are static, and neither is true. Your culture is always moving. I talk about culture being like a garden. It's always growing. Your culture is always moving, and the people you hire are always adapting. So the issue of culture fit, and Joe, you gave a great example as you were speaking. Sometimes we have 20 years employees who are unwilling to adapt to the shifting culture. So they were willing to shift so much, but they decided not to shift any further. That's how culture continues to shift over time. So for me, if you're looking to hire, first of all, you want to make culture part of your communication. You want your employees to be talking about your culture outwardly. And you want to look for people who have a history of being in a culture similar to yours or who have shown the ability to adapt. Because I've been with many executives who have spent six-figure salaries to bring somebody in at a high level, VP level, that has a strong history of performance, and they come in to the culture in the organization and they bomb. It's not that they were lying, it's that they were operating in a different culture. That's the key.
Yeah, interesting. You know, people talk about their companies. You know, the Super Bowl's coming up, and for most of us, you'll go to some place and some party, and you know, inevitably talk about where you work. Well, this is what your employees do as well. You know, and are your employees at that party talking to their buddies saying, oh yeah, you know, I work for company X and, you know, it's a job, it's too much to quit, not enough to stay, but you know, it's kind of this, kind of that. Or are they brand advocates? Are they brand ambassadors of your company? and they're saying, yeah, I work for company Y and it's awesome and it's great and we do these things. So culture is more than just, signs on a wall and pictures saying, do the right thing and people rowing boats in the right order. It's how people live and manifest that culture, and then how they express it out in the community. Because again, in the talent wars, you're hiring from a fixed pool of people that live within 30 minutes or so of where your office is. And if the brand of your culture is, is X versus Y, that's going to attract or repel the type of people that may or may not want to work for you. So thanks for
Yeah,
that
so
input.
Joe, getting into your metaphor of gravity, okay?
Yeah.
So culture as gravity, to use your metaphor, the Earth has one natural satellite called the moon. Mercury and Venus have 0. Jupiter has 67 moons. Saturn has 62 moons. Those planets have greater gravity. And the reason they keep those moons is because of that gravity. When you have culture, if you're looking at gravity, culture as a metaphor for gravity, the greater your culture, the greater stickiness, that your employees don't want to leave. That's how I would use gravity as a metaphor in that way.
Yeah, that's great. Thanks for building on that. Gustavo, let's take one more question, one more concept here. I'd love to hear your thoughts on this. But you talk to some of our members, and I'm blessed because I get to go out and speak at all of our VESs and talk to all of our members. And some folks say, I have an awesome culture. Our culture is great. What can those people be doing now? What more can they be doing, or what else should they be doing?
Great question, Joe. So if you truly believe you have an awesome culture, I think it's the great opportunity to go to your employees, bring them in to a discussion about what can we do better? How can we make, while maintaining our level of performance and increasing it, those are the parameters. What can we do better to make our culture better? What can we do to make your work life better and your personal life better? And I ask both questions because in a strong culture, people will make sacrifices of their personal time to sustain the culture if they believe and experience that the company actually cares about them personally as well. So what can we do? What can we do in order to maintain our performance where it is or improve it? What can we do to make your work life and your personal life better? I think opening a discussion with your employees, getting their input, makes them the ambassadors of culture, makes them what I talk about as cultural gardeners. So the CEO and the CEO's executive team is responsible for setting the parameters of the culture. It is every member of the culture, every employee of the organization is responsible for what I talk about as pulling weeds in the garden, which means calling out and stopping the behaviors that undermine your culture. And we do that by giving them the authority and responsibility for culture-based statements. We don't do that here. That's not how we roll here. That's not how we do things here. This is how we do things here. This is how we roll here. This is how things get done here. Or we don't do that here anymore if you're in a shifting culture. This is how we do things here now if you're in a shifting culture.
Well, it reinforces that concept of you should expect what you accept. It's what you walk by in the office that people see and say, okay, that's okay. If the CEO shows up 10 minutes late for a meeting, then everybody else will show up 9 minutes late for a meeting, right? The CEO shows up and he's on his phone or he's doing this or doing that, that's acceptable. If that's the behavior that you see, that's what's going to happen. And I'd love to build on your concept about it's a garden, and gardens are constantly growing and changing and evolving. How do you avoid getting caught up in a static of, we got a good culture, it's just good and we're going to live with it and roll with it, when people are leaving and changing and coming in and business evolves over time? How do you keep that garden fresh?
Yeah, that's a great question. So for me, when you have a strong culture, you have beliefs, behavior, rules, traditions, and rituals. There are a lot of tacit understanding. So somebody who's coming in new can feel the culture. It's palpable. It's palpable on how people greet one another, how people do work, how people drive towards performance. So one of the things, I've done a lot of work in manufacturing. One of the things I'm always try to be there for a shift change, because for a shift change, what are they talking about? Are they talking about how well they did on the last shift? Or do they say, don't work too hard? Because that latter statement is a classic statement that I've heard dozens of times. It's depressing performance. Because, of course, if you work too hard, A, you're going to make me look bad, and B, you're just making more money for the man. And in a strong culture, we're all part of the same organization, so we're all pushing forward.
You remind me of a company I worked for once where I used to call these folks the 459ers, because at 4:59 they were out the door and gone, And that was
There
the
you go.
end of the game versus the discretionary effort that highly engaged employees have when they care about what they're doing and they care about the reasons they're doing it. It's not what does it say on the clock, it's where I'm at in the workflow, what needs to get done.
So I refer to that as quintessence. It's going above and beyond the goal because they know it's good for the organization, good for the team, good for them, and good for the cause.
Yeah. Well, Greg, Gustavo, thank you very much. Please feel free to jump in at any point in time as we keep going along. The next segment I wanted to go to is our thought framework for components of culture. Now, there's a lot of really excellent models and different ways that different people think about culture. And what I wanted to create was just kind of what we wanted to create was kind of the composite of how we viewed culture and really just to create a thought framework to get our CEOs, our members to think about this. And again, at Vistage Research, our job is not to answer questions, right? Only you, our members, can decide what's right for you. Our job is to raise questions and to make you think. So I hope this thought framework, our components of culture, will do that for you. So let me spend a couple minutes, if I could, and kind of walk through that. For us, and again, this is kind of with the research and the intense discussions we had back and forth and all the input we got from folks like Gustavo and Ann and Mark Taylor contributed, one of our great chairs contributed to the report, is I think that that culture begins with trust. That trust is the connective energy that pulls everyone and everything together. We had, it was a year and a half, 2 years ago now, I think, at our own executive Vistage Inside group, we spent a half a day talking about trust because we couldn't really come to agreement to what trust meant. And I think about trust on a number of aspects. Trust one is about competency. Do I trust that you have the capabilities, the skills, the experience, and the knowledge to do your job, right? You walk onto an airplane and you assume that pilot knows how to fly. And Boeing's a great example now. You walk onto a Boeing 737, you look around and say, is this a MAX? Because we no longer trust the Boeing organization that they've got safety first. When now everything is coming out suggesting that, in fact, safety wasn't first. They cut some corners and they did some stuff to try to get the plane out. So competency, do you trust the people you're with and their ability to do their job, is one of those first parts of trust. Next is consistency. How consistent are people in their actions and behaviors, right? You trust someone based upon the history of experiences you've had with them leading up to that one moment. It takes a long time to build a high and deep level of trust with a person or an organization, and it takes a nanosecond for it to be broken or to be weakened and to be torn apart. So how consistent are we in our actions and our behaviors so that I can feel comfortable to predict that you'll behave this way? I remember, again, back in the day, I worked for a company, and I remember going into my review, and I didn't know if I was going to get fired or get more stock because they were just so inconsistent in terms of how they behaved. The next component or element of trust is, I think, integrity. Integrity is just being truthful and honest. I mean, let's face it, integrity is saying what you'll do and doing what you'll say. And you could argue today, irrespective of your political opinions, that we're having a crisis of integrity in our country right now because we don't know who to believe and we don't know what to believe. And what that does is that breaks down that culture when there is no sense of integrity, that we can all look at a fact and agree that a fact is a fact. And again, irrespective of where you sit on the continuum, what's disconcerting to me is that we cannot agree on what facts are. I think the next aspect is transparency. High trust means that you're willing to share and you're open. Do leaders share numbers? Now, you're not going to share all the numbers of the business. I understand that. But are you transparent about where the business is and how it's performing? Are you transparent in your dialogue and how you share the vision, the direction of where you want to go? And then I think finally, it is about relationships. It's about the relationships that leaders and employees develop over time. And Gustavo, your story was a great one about the CEO that walked through the floor and didn't talk to everyone. And there's another example. In fact, Sam Reese, our CEO, once a week he'll take an hour and just go randomly walk up to somebody's desk and say, hey, how you doing? What's going on? What are you doing? What's happening? And in our office has got, we've got the right words. We focus on culture. We focus on our mission, vision, purpose. But Sam lives it daily or by how he engages with people in building relationships, because humans thrive on relationships. When there's that sense of connectedness, when they can trust the people that they're working with, when they're consistent in those behaviors, when there's high integrity, when there's transparency and relationships in place, that's how trust becomes that connective energy that binds the organization together. Next are the elements of culture. And again, we debated this back and forth a lot, and I think it begins with values. Values define what's important to the company. And again, values are something you see printed on walls and posted on posters, but are the values of your company, do people live those? Do they breathe those? Are they really what guides the humans in your organization and the behaviors they exhibit when you're not there? They say culture is what happens when you're not in the office. And that's true, and that's based upon the values that you express as a business and how you reinforce and support those in your actions and behaviors. Language is next. And Gustavo, you mentioned a number of these, and again, this is just an example of a lot of much smarter people than me looking at this and coming to approximate same places. But language is what are the words that you use? How do you talk about customers? Do you have respect for the individual? If the CEO sits in a meeting and starts dropping F-bombs, does that mean everybody can drop F-bombs? What are the words you use to describe the behaviors, describe how you interact with your customers, how you interact with each other in the context of the business, both in terms of the actual business settings, but the social settings in the lunchroom or before or after work. Next in my mind is communications. What are the protocols, the patterns, the way that you communicate? Is communications just done through the hallways and around the coffee machine? Or do you have a very conscious approach to how you communicate to your employees, to your customers, and into your community? And that's why communications is such an important element of this. Next is behaviors, and we've touched on this a lot but what are the behaviors that are acceptable, right? Is it acceptable to show up late for meetings? Is it acceptable to be unprepared? Is it acceptable to show up late or early or whatever? What are the behaviors that are exhibited in a company? Because it's really easy to say what you say, but it's much harder to do what you do, and to do it consistently and do it in a way that reflects all the aspects of the business you want. Like I said, expect what you accept. What are the behaviors that you accept in the office? Because that becomes a threshold that everyone sees and everybody observes. And oh, by the way, everybody's always watching. They watch everything the leader does, everything the leader says, how the leader acts and interacts. So behaviors are critical. And the last piece, and Gustavo, you mentioned this, is rituals. What are the habits? What are the observable evidence of culture that happens in your organization, right? New hire onboarding, I mentioned that before. But when is a new employee more susceptible to learning about your culture than the very first day? What are the rituals in terms of all company meetings or the company picnic or you go to a game? Yeah, these are kind of HR-ish kind of functions, but the rituals that you observe as an organization is one of those key elements that when blended with values, language, communications, and rituals, those become the elements that sit on top of our foundation of trust. The next layer is the business, right? I mean, we're in business. Organizations are in business for a reason. They're in business to generate profits. Now, there are purpose-driven organizations who exist solely for their purpose, but the culture of the business has to in some way be connected to the mission of the business. The mission describes what the business does. What are your deliverables? Our mission is to provide the highest quality this for that, right? And then what's your vision? Because your vision translates to the long-term direction of where the company wants to go. Your vision will also dictate what the agenda for this meeting is going to be and what we're going to accomplish today, this week, this month, this quarter. The mission and the vision are the two elements that binds the business to our elements of trust, again, connected to that foundation of trust. And then finally, what it comes down to, and what I think is the most powerful thing here, is the power of purpose. The purpose binds the people working together. It's why people stay past 4:59. It's why people care about what they do, that they're doing something more than just, again, to use your words, Gustavo, than working for the man. I got a job, yeah, too much to quit, not enough to stay, it's a job. Or are people motivated and engaged at their core about what your business does and why it contributes to whatever's important to you? Now, there may be businesses, and I've been part of at least subcultures inside of an organization, where the purpose was solely to get that leader promoted. And guess what that culture did? It created all the downstream badness that you would associate with someone whose only purpose was to get promoted, versus an organization or a subculture inside of an organization whose purpose is to meet and fulfill and over-satisfy customers, or to deliver timely, accurate, and impactful report. What is the purpose? I think it's the power of purpose that really drives, and at the core of this, much like at the core of the earth and the earth's gravity, is what creates and builds this culture. And why I think our model here, the components of culture, is again a thought model. It's a way for you to think about trust in your organization, to think about the elements of culture, your values, the language you use, how you communicate, the behaviors that you exhibit and accept, and the rituals that you observe. The purpose, the mission and vision of the business, and then the power of purpose as that powerful force that propels the business forward and motivates people to do more than just satisfy the requirements of their job. It motivates, energizes, and engages them to want to be part of something bigger than themselves. And we see.
Joe, can I just jump in and just add? I think because it's a brilliant point, and people work harder for cause and for cash. Cause is purpose. So once you pay them fairly, people work harder for cause and for cash. Give them a strong purpose, and they will push through walls for you.
People work harder for cause than for cash. Gustavo, with your permission, I'm going to repurpose that because that really, I think, really connects to this concept of purpose. So thank you for that.
Yeah, no, absolutely.
Well, that feels like an appropriate time then to bring in Ann. Ann has had some really big jobs, 25 years in the business world, always focused on service-oriented cultures and building that customer-first orientation. Ann, welcome, and give us a few comments, and then I'd love to pick your brain a little bit on your concept of built on values.
Thank you. All I will do is probably reinforce everything both of you have said. I have had the pleasure and privilege of working in many companies and building cultures by design. And it's very interesting. For example, being at Southwest, I learned the components of a great culture. And there are 5 things that we literally have now designed in terms of building addressing a systematic approach to building culture. And it just reinforces everything you've said. First of all, when we started JetBlue with 9 of us, we sat in a room and said, what do we want the Wall Street Journal to say about us 5 years from now? And we started with purpose, bringing humanity back to air travel. We then defined the values that we wanted to see within the company, that we wanted everyone to exhibit. And by design, also decided that we had to have the reciprocal behaviors. Many people design it around a set of values, but they never explain to people coming into the organization what it means. And so we actually designed behaviors that were very specific to every value. We then started hiring people. And by the way, it was in an environment where there was, like today, less than a 3% unemployment in New York. So we started in New York. So it was very difficult to find what we called A players. A players, by definition, in the organizations we work with, not only have the competencies, but they have the behaviors and the values that we hold near and dear in the organization. So we hired A players, but it took us a lot longer than we thought it would. But we hired people using a behavioral model that actually was developed in World War II with the Air Force, where they found that some pilots were successful in hitting their targets and some were not. And there were consistent behaviors in those that, when they analyzed it, were successful in hitting their targets. And so they started hiring to it, and they totally changed the outcomes. So we spend a lot of time hiring A players. And I will tell you, in the organizations that we've studied and worked with, you will find that it is worth spending time to hire people that are right for the organization, that have the values, that have the right behaviors. And it's about 90% predictive if you build a hiring model around behaviors for specific jobs, if you do it right. So hiring A players around a set of behaviors that mirror the values is a critical part of being successful in a values-based organization and building a culture that is literally, by definition, the culture you want to have. Accountability and rewards. One of the things that we found is exactly what you all have talked about. People, it's not a cash game with them. What it is recognition, especially millennials. And Gustav, you are the expert, but I will tell you, millennials love to be, at least in the organizations we worked with, love to be recognized for doing a good job in front of their peers.
Amen.
And Southwest, has always paid 10% below market typically, and they've had the lowest turnover in the industry. This has been going on a long time with them, 46 years. And
amen again.
And they have 3 values. They live and breathe those. We did not even hire Herb Kelleher's son, who could not pass the hiring test on behaviors, and Herb never turned it around. We worked with an organization that is a small tech company. They had about 30 employees. And after we defined the values and the behaviors they wanted to see, do you know, he realized that his partner, who was his brother, was not the right person for that organization, and they parted ways. Because really, literally, what happens when you define the values and behaviors is you see who is right for the organization and who is not. And it's very evident. Do you know that in what we found at Southwest, we had people that self-ejected because they didn't feel comfortable in that relaxed, fun environment, also one that was highly productive, highly productive. They have fewer people per aircraft than any airline in the country. And so what they would find people would talk about is they would talk about, this guy isn't right for the organization. I think I'll talk him into working for the competition, which I thought was a great idea. So, and our rewards are really recognition. Our rewards are in the organizations we work with are all based on the values and being good storytellers, making sure that you tell stories for a reason. If you ever watch some of the great CEOs that I've studied, they always talk about their people being first, and then they will give an example of how their people behaved, not just Mary, oh, Joe Blow said you were great as a client. Well, really, what did Joe say I did? So reinforcement of the behaviors continually is what will create in the minds of your people that work with you a continued sense of how that behavior is important and how it mirrors the values. So accountability and rewards are part of the methodology I believe great organizations use. I would reinforce what you said. I believe that your people are your brand and your values and behaviors define that brand. I don't go to any group that I don't ask, well, if you've flown Southwest, did you notice what one of their values are? Every single person, as late as yesterday when I was running a blueprinting session, they said it's got to be fun. It's very evident what their values are, and they have built that into the brand. I believe your brand, your values are your brand, and your people certainly are your brand when they exhibit those values and those behaviors. Behaviors are critical to great brands, consistent behaviors. Think about all the great brands you know and the ones you frequent. I frequent them because of the way I am treated. That means I frequent them because of the behaviors of the people that serve me or that are part of the brand. And last but not least, I don't believe there's ever been a great organization that did not care about metrics and didn't care about continually getting better. I have read a number of books, and one of them by Dr. Cooper was talking about how when you really study the great organizations, the ones that have been great over time, and Jim Collins wrote about it in his book, Great by Choice, the ones that have been great over time have had a set of values that they live and breathe that don't change over time. And they have, you know, years ago when we started JetBlue, we didn't call it purpose to bring humanity back to air travel, but they do have a purpose that people, as you said, can get aligned with. And do you know that we kept people that had many, many offers to go to another brand for a lot more money, and they would come tell us about it, but they would say, we've decided to stay. Because at Southwest and JetBlue, we built an organization. If you walk through those organizations, you're going to feel the energy. Yeah. And I think great organizations, regardless of the size, you can feel it. When you said when the shifts change and you're at the door and you're watching people come in, you're absolutely right. Have you seen it in great organizations? They come in smiling, they're happy, and they say, great day. It's just wonderful to see the energy and to see the enthusiasm and to see the joy of work. I mean, when people come in and they're excited about it, they don't come in with long faces. They run in.
The joy of work, that's another phrase I'm gonna repurpose if you don't mind. You know, and I wanted to ask you a question if I could, and that is that, you know, at big companies like Southwest and JetBlue, I'm sure you had ways or you had concepts at least around how do you measure culture. As you've spoken to Vistage CEOs and you know our world and the nature of our folks, what advice or what suggestions would you give in terms of how you could kind of put some metrics to this?
So we put metrics around turnover, around customer sat. We use the NPS, a Net Promoter Score, and we use it. I believe that culture and employees wanting to stay with you. We also do a lot of, every 6 months we do surveys with our people to see, and you know what the new interesting question, and I bet you all have some comments on this. We ask them how long they intend to stay. We think that is one of the most critical questions you can ask today. And we believe that our customer sat will move with our employee sat. So we actually are doing some work with Reichheld on, is it true that that net promoter score, if we use it for our employee surveys and our customer surveys, would they move together? We don't have the results yet. We're still working on it with them, but my belief is they will work together. So as employee satisfaction moves, the employee sat will move. Pardon?
One of the examples of metrics that have become more prominent lately is employee engagement, the
Right.
ability to measure engagement of employees. What are your thoughts on that as not the metric, but a metric?
So engagement to me is defined by how long are they going to stay? How do they enjoy their job? Of course, 89% of the people leave because of their direct supervisor. That's the latest data anyway. So we actually, in our survey, we don't ask a lot of questions, but we ask the critical ones. How long do you intend to stay? Do you enjoy working with us on a schedule, you know, 1 to 10? We also ask, by the way, employee sat and customer sat are tied to managers' bonuses as a big part of the bonus.
Sure.
I think that you have to tie them to something too. So employee satisfaction and customer sat, we look at all those numbers. We look at turnover. I think what's interesting too is as you know, Herb Kelleher never believed in homogenized information. And I think when you were talking about walking, we used to have a plan that every officer had to walk every day the building, and every person on a shift change, like in the reservations, they would walk, and before the shift and after the shift, and they would stand at the doors. The simple things, you can learn more by just talking to people than you might ever learn from other feedback. Now, what I like on employee satisfaction surveys is at the very end, we ask, what is the one thing you would change?
Well,
I think you learn a lot from what they respond to that, their response to that question.
Fascinating, and thank you so much. And please feel free to jump in as we approach the end of our session here, because we talked a little bit, and it's one of the things that when Ann and I were doing the work on this, we're thinking about, you know, what's the evidence? How do you see? What are the exhibits of a strong culture? That, and I think Gustavo, you made this point, that you walk into a company and you walk around and you know right away there's these signs of culture. So we wanted to capture a few of them. You know, one of them is, you know, is your talent pipeline full of great candidates? Again, this is a reflective of the power of your brand, your gravity of your company to attract people. Are you constantly struggling to get people to even come in to talk to you because you don't have that strength of pipeline, right? Yeah, and you mentioned this, the average tenure of employees. How long have people been working for you? That's a reflection not just of the company, but how your managers embrace and live the values of your organization, how they embrace your mission, vision, and purpose that pulls it all together. Employee referrals, one of the questions we asked, again, this is a talent war related question, but it connected back here was, what is your best, if recruiting and hiring is a problem for you, what are the tactics that are most successful? And far and away, by a 3-to-1 margin, was referrals. 57% said referrals was the most effective tool. Why? Because if I'm happy working for XYZ Corp, I'm going to share that with people. And you know what? I'm going to refer and bring in people that I think are going to contribute to it. I love to tell the story about my friend Jimmy, who was a great guy to have a beer with and go to a game, but I would never bring him into the business. He's crazy. My other buddy, Andy, I mean, this man is a workhorse. That's what he does. He's like built to work. I would bring him in because A, he would contribute to the company, and B, he would make me look good. I'm not going to bring in my idiot friend, Jimmy, who's going to make me look bad, because that's like me saying, that's okay. Go ahead, Gustavo. Yeah, jump in.
No, I just because the point you're making and the point that Ann made, millennials are your strongest recruiters. Because if they like where they work, they use social media like no generation has before. If you need, if you're looking for people, all you have to do is go to your millennial, your employees, and say to them, you know what, we're looking for some people just like you. Do you have any friends who might want to work here?
Yeah.
You will be, if you have a good culture, you will be flooded with resumes.
You know, one of the metrics of interest is what percentage of your new hires are referrals. And a caveat here too is that, and you're probably going to jump in and say this ahead of me, but one of the caveats is you also need to have diverse people as well, not just diverse in terms of ethnicity and stuff, but you need to have people that aren't necessarily like them. Otherwise, you just get a big group thing going. But my point here is in talent wars, referrals are your best source.
Do you know that at Southwest, one of our pilots had 11 referrals that were hired?
Wow.
Uh,
Yeah.
I will tell you one thing though that I think is critical is that they get through the door fast in today's environment. So we actually created a card that if they tell us that so-and-so referred them, they will be immediately, because someone observed them in a different environment and they saw them behaving in a way that mirrored the behaviors we want to see. So we had a code on a name, and if they say that TJ Maxx told me to call you, they were immediately brought in.
But I like to believe that your best people will bring you your best people.
You're right.
Yeah. And lastly, are your employees engaged? We talked about employee engagement as this concept of discretionary effort. And when you ask someone, hey, can you stay, if you ask a 459er, can you stay after 5 o'clock? Oh, I really need to go walk the dog. Or are they engaged because they're connected to and they're emotionally at an emotional level connected to what's going on and what's happening inside the business. So with that leads us to the questions that you need to ask. As I mentioned, our job at Vistage Research is not to answer questions, it's to raise questions. Our job is to make you think. And if anything that we've shared or some of the amazing insights from both Ann and Gustavo made you stop and think today, then we've done our job, because that's the purpose, because only you can decide what's right for your business. Only you can decide the culture that you want to have. So here's a question. Is culture part of your day-to-day work? As a leader, is that something you do every day? And that's why, especially in this environment, making culture a priority is simply a requirement. You can no longer let culture happen on its own, or as I said before, you'll get the culture you deserve. What metrics are you using to measure culture? We talked about this. Annie had some great insights, right? Connect culture to metrics. If your culture is strong and vibrant, it will show up in your metrics. It will be that unseen force that will propel and drive your business forward. Are you walking the talk? I mean, are you standing up and saying integrity and then turn around and lying or hiding data? Are you saying be on time for meetings and you show up 5 minutes late? Because everyone watches everything you do all the time as a leader. And the standards you set becomes the bar for behaviors. So you have to lead by example. And then how defined is your mission, vision, and purpose? Is it something you just talk about once at the annual meeting? Is it something you paint on the walls, or do you live it? At Vistage, our sole purpose is to help high integrity leaders make great decisions that benefit their companies, their families, and their communities. And we live that every day and we breathe that every day. And that's how we've articulated our mission, vision, and purpose. And you'll see this again, you won't just see it around, but it's referred to and it's captured and is brought to life in the organization for everything that we do. And with that, I'd like to leave you with this last story. And this happened last fall. As I said, I have the privilege of being able to present to our members at all of our Vistage Executive Summits. And I was making this point, I believe it was in Kansas City last fall, talking about the importance of culture and the impact to hiring and your brand and many of the points we made today. And after the session, one of our members came up and said to me, he said, Joe, tell me, what does culture look like? And we talked for a minute. I asked him a few questions. He described this and he described that. And at the end of the conversation, I looked at him. I said, if you want to know what culture looks like, look in the mirror, because that's what your culture is. It's a direct reflection of you. I'd like to thank Ann and Gustavo for joining us today and for just bringing some amazing insights to our report and the color commentary you brought today. And with that, Ann, I'm going to turn it back to you. See if we have any questions out there that so we can get we can get inside these folks' brains a little bit more and learn even more.
Yeah, excellent. So, Anne, you did speak to some of the surveys that you did, but we did have a question about measuring culture with a survey. So there's those questions like satisfaction and NPS, but what is the best tool to actually measure a culture? If you ask maybe, somebody one-to-one, they might always say it's great, but so is there a quantitative way to actually capture what the drivers are for a specific organization?
Well, one of the things we believe is that you can actually measure it depending upon those metrics that you've decided are most important to you. So one of the things we believe, though, is that it should be a short survey. It should not be a long survey, but you should ask those questions that are critical to, we believe, your success. So we want to, every year, one of our goals is to get every employee to want to stay a year or two longer, because in today's environment, everyone seems to turn over faster. So one of the critical questions that we always ask is, how long do you intend to stay? That is one. Pardon?
Go ahead, finish. I'm sorry.
I'm just going to say that is one of the questions that has given us huge insight. And what we find is that if we can create one more year and keep them happy to 3 to 5 years, they will actually stay longer.
One of the interesting aspects of culture that comes from LinkedIn is they've accepted the point that you've made, that people don't stay with companies forever, that their lifespans are shorter, and they have this concept they call tour of duty, that someone will come in and for a period of time, that's their tour of duty. When that's up, they'll move on to something else. They may come back for a second tour later on, but they don't stigmatize people for leaving. Rather, they respect that people will come in and do a certain function, their tour of duty, and then move on. So just a comment there. Back to you, Ann.
Can I just add, because Ann, I really love that question. I think it's a brilliant question. Late last year, Gallup published a 10-question survey called the Gallup Culture Assessment. It's one that I really like. It looks at 10 factors that if people are looking for a quantitative tool, I would point them in that direction as well. Gallup Culture Assessment.
Good survey. Use it too.
Beautiful. Thank you so much. So in our conversation, we talked a little bit about millennials, and I know that that's something that, Gustavo, you're experienced with. Love the conversation about how they like to be recognized and strongest recruiters. But going on that generational theme, if you have 5 generations working at a company, how do you build a culture considering all the different values and needs of everyone? Gustavo, I'll kick that to you.
Oh,
yeah, I'll kick that to you.
So for me, we're all human beings. I think that we are driven by primary human drives, and I think strong cultures focus on those primary human drives and motivations. And the fact is, those are what affect us across all cultures, all generations. All generations. So we're talking about, Joe laid out a great model for trust. Trust was looked at by a psychologist named Mishra at University of Indiana about reliability, openness, competence, concern. Those are 4 behaviors that everyone is going to be looking for and looking at to really develop trust in a culture. Primary human drives are to connect and belong. So we're talking about relationships and what I call cause Joe has been referring to as purpose, belonging to something larger than ourselves. Regardless of generation, I always talk about building one culture for every generation of the workforce.
That's fantastic. Thank you so much. And we could probably stay on the line all day talking about things. But unfortunately, we are at the end of our time. So I want to thank everyone who has attended today, and especially thank Joe for the conversation you led, and Ann and Gustavo for your insights today. This recording will be available to those who have registered. You can also visit vistage.com/webinar to understand more about our past webinars and see what upcoming webinars we have planned. One of our frequent thought leaders that we have in the Research Center, Kathleen Quinn-Votaw, has an on-demand webinar on the Talent and Culture Roadmap for 2020. That was a webinar we offered last year, as well as one from Insperity. So I appreciate the opportunity to share this with you today. The report is available in the handout section, or you can download it at the Vistage Research Center on vistage.com. So thank you to everyone, and have a fantastic day.